Hello everyone, my name is Drew Mitchener with Greenbox Solar, and this is the very first of an ongoing series we're going to do to help answer just the most popular, the most common questions that we're seeing come in through our doors or over the phone. There's a few questions that get asked nearly every day, and we're going to start with probably the one that's asked the most as we do more and more energy storage, battery systems of all shapes, sizes, from cabins and whole home backups and partial backups and whatever. The calculations are similar in all those, but it's not a one size kind of fits all type answer. There's no answer to every one of those. Everybody has a little different situation, different goals, so I'm hoping to provide some insight so you can make those calculations and come up with a pretty good answer to the question of how long will a home battery last. So let's get rolling here. Alright, so basically go through four steps, 4 points in this video. First, just what is being powered by the load. It's one of the big variables, obviously. The more stuff or the less stuff you have running on a battery, needing to be powered by battery, the longer that battery, whatever size it is, will last. Second, what is the total battery capacity? Third, how can the battery be recharged? I'll just go over at the end summary and a couple of tips. I'll talk about how to improve whatever battery capacity you end up with, make it last a little longer. Alright. First, what is being powered by the battery? The amount of energy being consumed over a period of time determines how long a fixed amount of battery capacity will last. So the big variable here is what you're doing in the home, in the cabin, the RV, whatever it might be. We'll focus mostly on home applications right now, but if you've got or you want to have the entire home backed up, that's going to be a much larger load and requiring much more battery to run for the same amount of time than if you only have the bare essentials backed up. You would either need a lot less battery or you can run longer on a larger battery. Either case, the biggest variable in these systems is how much power is being consumed, what devices, appliances you want to have able to be powered when it's running completely off of a battery. And that's whether it's in a battery backup situation or a fully off-grid application. Either way, the math is basically the same. A little more detail on load calculation. So determine what will be powered by the battery. This may be only the bare essentials to get by during a power outage, or this could be the entire home, as I mentioned before. So some common appliances and devices, and this would be like a very common list of the essential backup or protected loads backup, critical loads backup, all interchangeable terms. Refrigerator, freezer, keeping the food cold for a typical power outage. Furnace blower, if it's cold out, that's not running an electric furnace, that's the blower, typically on a gas furnace, so not tons and tons of power. Some lights, typically not every light in the house, but strategic lights around the house, backed up lights now don't take too much power, so you can have a few of those. Garage door opener is pretty common, so that you're not having to use the manual release. And your internet modem and router is becoming more of an essential for people all the time. So, and that's just a list of the most common things for an essential. Again, you could have more stuff. You could go all the way to just backing up your entire house. It just requires more battery for today's conversation. The more stuff you want to put on it, unless of course you don't want to back it up very long. But we'll get into the time scenario here shortly. Alright, so just an example of a load calculation and how it corresponds to time and your battery capacity. So battery capacity is measured in watt hours. In order to calculate how long a battery will last, we need to determine the watt hour consumption of the loads. In the example to the right, we can see that one 100 watt light bulb running for 10 hours uses 1,000 watt hours of energy. 10 of the same 100-watt bulb running for only 1 hour uses the same 1,000 watt hours or 1 kilowatt of energy. So the total amount of power, or I'm sorry, the total consumption is the same. It's just the time changes and the amount of the bulb. So we run 100 watt load, in this case a light bulb, for a long time, 10 hours, equals 1,000 watt hours. So just the watts again times the time equals the watt hours, hours being the unit of time in this example. Or we can run 10 times that amount of load, or 10 times the amount of power, but for a tenth of the amount of time. So in this case, 1,000 watts for 1 hour. 1,000 times 1, same amount of watt hours. We also see this unit of measurement when it gets above 1,000, often moves to a kilowatt hour. 1,000 watt hours equals 1 kilowatt hour. That's almost in all cases, that's the unit of measurement you're going to see, like on your utility bill, for example, will be measured in how many kilowatt hours your home consumed over the course of a month or a billing cycle. What is the total battery capacity? In this example, we're going to use a 1 kilowatt hour or 1,000 watt hour battery. So if we use the consumption examples from the last slide, 1,000 watt hours powered by a 1,000 watt hour battery, the battery will last for 1 hour. So super simple example there, running 1,000 watts, we do that continuously for 1 hour. We have a battery that's rated at 1 kilowatt hour. It'll run that load for 1 hour. If we use a 10 kilowatt hour battery instead, it will last for 10 hours. So kind of corresponding to that 10 light bulb example before, if we multiply the battery capacity by 10, keep the load the same, then we run it for 10 times the amount of time. In this case, 10 hours. Now, if we increase dramatically that load, say from 1,000 watts, we ran consistently at 5,000 watts for an hour, and we had a 10 kilowatt hour battery, then it would last for 2 hours. So it's just the amount of time that will run corresponds directly to the load in kilowatts or watts that you're putting on the battery. How can the battery be recharged, and how does that change how long the battery lasts? So lots of ways to charge a battery. The most common is obviously grid power. The second example here is what most people have, but for off-grid scenarios, solar is super common, and then a generator often used now as a backup. And then wind, they'll use less and less in smaller systems. We still see once in a while as well. So why am I even talking about the charging? Because it definitely impacts how long the battery will last. But this is a moving target all the time, because especially with solar and wind, those are variable charging sources. So there's no exact science to this. If you have a 10 kilowatt system, 10 kilowatts of solar output, and you're in perfect conditions and you're able to get about that full 10 kilowatts of output, then that would charge a 10 kilowatt hour battery in an hour. Under real world conditions, if you have a 10 kilowatt solar array, solar system, you're not going to actually get 10 kilowatts of output. Lots of factors there with which direction your panels are facing, and whether there's clouds outside, and how dirty your panels are, the efficiency of the panels and the inverter and all that. There's lots of input factors there, but to keep things simple, if you were able to get 10 kilowatts of solar output, you have a 10 kilowatt hour battery, which is a pretty common size battery for a single battery, charge in an hour. If you're using it for a backup power on a typical home that's connected to the grid, then grid power can also be a charging source. So if your power goes out, you use your battery for 4 hours, power comes back on, then you can charge quickly from the grid even if it's in the middle of the night or whatever. This is varies by how fast it can charge, varies by the type of inverter or charger, battery charger that you have on that system. But the most common inverters now we're seeing is right around 8,000 watt battery charger built into those units. So if you had an 8,000 watt charger charging the grid, it's going to charge that full 8,000 watts. It'll take right around an hour, uh, 20 hour and a half, 1.2 hours or so to charge that battery if it was fully dead to 100%. A generator, this is a pretty common scenario where we would install a generator as a backup to solar, for example, especially in a fully off-grid scenario, because again, solar is variable, and depending on how long it might be raining or snowing outside, or the clouds are out, you may need an additional charging source, and since you're off-grid, you can't rely on the utility to provide that. And so a generator can be either automatically or manually started to charge the battery. So it can be a very efficient use of a fuel source for the generator. So instead of just running that around the clock to power all the loads, the cabin or whatever you've got, it can just run long enough to charge the batteries and then run off the batteries for many more hours or days or however much battery you've designed it for. So generator typically will charge at the same rate as the grid power charging rate. So in this example, again, about 8,000 watts, just charging 10 kilowatt hour battery in roughly 1.2 hours. Wind, although again becoming less and less common in a smaller charging application, off-grid application, the calculation is the same as solar. So it just depends on how much output your wind turbine has. If you have 10 kilowatts of output, similar to solar, it takes an hour to charge 10 kilowatt hour battery. So, all these will extend the life, obviously, of a battery. We typically design, especially an off-grid system, for the worst case scenario. It's, you live in a snowy climate, it's a blizzard outside, you're running completely off battery. How long will that battery power the things you need it to power? And everybody has a different comfort level on that, so there's not a definite rule of thumb there. Although we typically would suggest a minimum of 48 hours of battery autonomy on an off-grid system. But some of that 48 hours, you may have a little bit of solar, you may have a little bit of wind, you might turn on your generator for a couple hours, so that all those things can extend your worst case scenario, in that example, 48 hours of runtime. So, but when you're calculating how much battery you're going to have for what loads you have, I think it's smart to use that worst case scenario. So in this case, maybe we're looking at 48 hours of running loads. All right. So summary and some tips. While there is no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of how long will the battery last, it is possible to estimate very accurately for each home and for the goals of each battery system. So again, this just means creating a list of what you want backed up on your battery, or everything in the home that will be running if it is an off-grid home or cabin. So figuring out, let's take a refrigerator as the example. I didn't get into this too much earlier, but if your refrigerator is averaging 200 watts per hour, so 200 watt hours, and you want to have one day of the ability to run for 24 hours on a battery. So you're taking 24 times 24 hours times 200 watts. So what is that? Make sure I get the math here for you guys right. It took me a second to do that math in my head there, but that's 4,800 watts, 4,800 watt hours, I'm sorry, of battery capacity you would need in that example to run that fridge. So roughly a 5 kilowatt hour battery would run that fridge for a day if there was no charging. So sun didn't shine, no wind, didn't turn on the generator, you don't have the ability, or the grid's down, or you're not connected to it in the first place. Um, so if that's what you're designing for, is one day, great. If you want the ability to run that fridge for 2 days in the worst case scenario, then you're going to need a 10 kilowatt hour um, battery, the same thing. So making that list of all the devices, the fridge, how much the furnace blower is using, how many lights, and what the wattage is of those lights. So it requires a little bit of prep work to figure out what your total load is. I didn't show one on this slide, but there are lots of great load calculators available online to help you make that list and not forget anything important. Um, I kind of went over that next bullet point. Designing for a fully off-grid application is important. Design for the worst-case scenario, and for multiple charging sources, to have multiple charging sources. So, um, yeah, I think it's still smart to have a generator. That's the most common backup we have. Keep a little bit of fuel around for that. You may go very extended periods of time and never have to use that, but um, it's nice to have there when you do get those snowy, prolonged storms, whether it's snow or rain or whatever, and you can't get things charged up from solar. So, um, next is be strategic about what power is being consumed and when. So, um, you could definitely extend the life of that battery, and this is mostly when solar is an option, when you're charging from solar. But by using certain appliances, certain devices, charging things during the day when the sun's out, because often, especially in the summer months, when you have lots of solar shining long days, it's very likely that you'll you'll be your batteries will be fully charged, you're running the home, and you have excess power coming from solar that's just being wasted and not doing anything. So when you have those times, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer months. That would be a good time to use your larger electric appliances. Maybe if you have an electric stove or electric dryer or some of those larger loads that are possible, use it then. Or even just your smaller things, plug in your phone and let it charge up in the middle of the day so that it's good to go during the night. And that way, when the sun goes down, you only have to run the absolute essentials, maybe your furnace blower and some lights or something during the nighttime hours. Conserve that battery life as much as possible. So, um, yeah, just use the sun when it's out. So that example is mostly for a solar-based energy storage system. And last, but very important nonetheless, the simplest and often least expensive way to make any battery last longer is to consume less. So choosing an energy efficient appliances and devices can make a big impact on how much battery capacity is needed. Um, so, yeah, especially in a new construction situation, or you're building a cabin, maybe just replacing a refrigerator, uh, it's usually a very good investment to spend a little extra money on the more efficient appliance, or the little better window, or the little more insulation. Still cheaper than buying more battery, and it can just yeah it means you have to either have less battery to run the same stuff for the same amount of time, or you can run longer on the battery. So either way, saving you some money. It's a lot less to spend a couple $100 extra on a fridge, I guess is what I'm telling you, than hundreds, if not thousands, on big batteries and energy storage equipment. Um, so think about it when you're designing your new building, if it is a new building. So, and that's about it. That was short and sweet, but the point of that battery, or that video, was just to uh, show that there's no straight answer for that question. I think we get asked that question a lot, and in hopes of having it'll last for X amount of hours, and just everybody's situation is different. People have different things they want to power. They want to power on for longer times. Some people are just worried about a short 3 or 4 hour typical power outage. Some people are more concerned about a very long term, weeks or months outage, and they want to be able to run indefinitely for at least certain loads. So it's important to know what you want to power, how long you want to power it, and then we can design, or you can design the battery capacity and other equipment around that number. Um, Again, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. We're going to make some more of these videos with the other commonly asked questions. And certainly if you have any questions in regards to this video or anything you'd like more details on or expand on, comment on that and we'll make some supplemental videos for those questions as well. Thank you.